that vital role of the jury in our English justice system. And in particular, we've seen the courts banning those engaged in campaigns of political resistance from explaining their motivations. We've seen evidence being disallowed. We've seen telling the jury that motives, even if articulated, are irrelevant and may be ignored. We've seen people sent to prison just for using the terms climate change and fuel poverty in court, and a number of other extreme positions. We're very lucky tonight, actually. We've got Trudy Warner with us, who famously held up a sign outside the Old Bailey earlier this year, reminding juries of their right to vote with their conscience. So particular welcome to Trudy tonight. So we, for those who haven't been before, we have a number of speakers for tonight, fantastic speakers who know what they're talking about in this field. And then afterwards, there'll be plenty of time for those listening and watching to give your views, to ask questions of our speakers. If you wouldn't mind, if you're not one of the speakers, during the initial speaking phase, if you wouldn't mind turning your cameras off so that we can all focus on those who are speaking. But please feel free to use the chat throughout. When we get to the end, if you've got a question and you prefer for me to ask it of our speakers, if you could just preface it with question in capitals, that just helps me to pick those out of what will probably be quite a lively chat. But otherwise, you're welcome to ask them in person at the end. So with no further ado, I'm going to start with our first speaker, Andy Williams. Andy joined XR very near the beginning and got arrested on Waterloo Bridge on the first day of the April 2019 rebellion. Later that year, he helped to set up a local XR Samba band who play at most of the big XR events. He's been arrested several times. He joined Insulate Britain late in their campaign and did a major action with them. This led to his arrest and a charge of public nuisance. He pleaded not guilty and opted for trial by jury, attending most of 2 early trials of a week each at the Inner London Crown Court, writing copious notes to help him and others to prepare their own cases. He was due to appear in March this year in court, but came down with flu, so it's been postponed to January next year. He wrote an academic peer-reviewed paper on insulation and heat pumps, which he'd hoped to use in evidence. That was before he learned that they wouldn't even be allowed to utter the word insulation. He's lately been doing some slow marches with Just Stop Oil. So welcome, Andy, and over to you.
Great, thank you, Terry. Could I share the screen? Because I've got a little presentation to show here. Rather than you people have to stare at me for 15 minutes. Let's see how this works. So, see if this works. So can people see the screen there? Right, I assume you can. So yeah, my name is Andy Williams and I live in Chelford, and I'm facing trial for public nuisance for an action with Insulate Britain. I'm going to talk about the Crown Court trials that Terry mentioned, which led up to the jury actions, which our next speaker, Val and John, will discuss. But first, a bit about how I got into this in the first place. I think Terry covered a bit of this, but I'll go through it anyway quickly. Let's just move this out of the way. So, I'm retired. A bit of a problem here with this. See if I can move that out of the way. Yeah. So when I retired, I turned my attention totally to the looming climate crisis. I took up an MSc in renewable energy technology and joined a number of local groups, all in some way connected with emissions and energy. Extinction Rebellion sounded way too extreme for me when I first heard about them. Blocking traffic and getting arrested was not my idea of how I wanted to spend my retirement. And I realised that my tactic of shouting at the radio just wasn't working. And so at the beginning of 2019, I screwed up my courage and signed up. Let's see if I just get out of the way of it. Okay. So I was in time for the April 2019 action, which brought central London to a standstill for a week, and which led directly to the UK Parliament declaring a climate emergency. Some people might remember the Waterloo Bridge being transformed into a festival site for a few days. Got a picture of it there. Let's change that a moment. Yeah, a picture of Waterloo Bridge, which just became just wonderful for a few heady days back in April. But at midnight, on the very first day of the action, I was arrested for blocking the bridge. I spent 15 hours in a police cell in solitary confinement. Everything except my clothes was taken away. It was a hell of a shock, actually, and time moved very slowly without a watch to see what was going on. At the end of that year, we started a samba band, and we still practice every week. And together with other bands from around the country, we provide the soundtrack for the big XR events. Let me know if you'd like to join. It's really good fun, and it's totally free. And we practice on Sunday evenings, by the way. But quite soon, XR was no longer making much of an impression. Whatever we did, we were no longer news, it seemed to me. So in June 2021, I went to an initial meeting of the group that would be called Insulate Britain. It was totally in tune with a simple demand, but the tactics, city across major roads and motorways, sounded extreme and hugely dangerous. So I wished them luck and walked away. When the campaign began, it made the headlines. Although nobody liked the tactics, people started talking seriously about the need for insulation. And Keir Starmer said that insulation would be his #1 priority if he was elected. And crucially, nobody was getting killed. You could see it was working, and so rather belatedly I signed up. I had to do a training session in London before I could join. The night before the action, we stayed together at a safe house in London where we planned action in great detail. It was to be at a very busy junction in central London during the rush hour. We had detailed drawings of the junction, and we planned exactly where each of us would sit, how we would let ambulances through, and so on. So early the following morning, we left in 2s and 3s. We met at the designated junction, and then when the lights turned red, we walked out and sat in front of the lorries. Lorries and vans and cars, they're all impatiently waiting for the lights to go green. And we just sat down on the road in front of them, unfurled our banners. One of the most terrifying things I've ever done, to tell the truth. Immediately, we had the blaring horns and the abuse of furious motorists and pedestrians, although some people did shout out their support, and that was worth a lot. Here's a still from a police video. You can see me there on the left-hand side, holding a banner with somebody else there. We're blocking one lane, and two other people holding a banner blocking that lane with the lorry in it. Felt really small and vulnerable down there in front of all the traffic. These two people here, by the way, I just cut off their heads. I edited them out because I don't know who they were. They were facing the camera, so I just edited the heads out. According to the police evidence, this roadblock that we caused made a 1.5 mile tailback all the way to Northumberland Avenue, 1.5 miles. So again, that's me from the body cam evidence of the officer who arrested me on the left-hand side there. The police took a long time to arrive because there was actually another Insulate Britain action at the same time as ours, not too far away. And so the police took about half an hour to get to us. And it seemed like a very long half hour. It was a great relief when they turned up and took control of the situation. We were all arrested and later we were charged with public nuisance. Public nuisance sounds like a trivial thing. It's actually not. It's actually quite a serious offence in law. So most of us pleaded not guilty and elected for a Crown Court trial. I had in mind the Shell 7 trial a couple of years ago, which a few people might remember. There were 7 defendants on trial for smashing windows and spraying graffiti on the Shell headquarters. They gave really powerful evidence and spoke at length about climate change and Shell deliberately lying about it. But the judge ruled they had no legal defence in his summing up. And yet the jury found them not guilty. They had heard the full motivation for the protest, and crucially, the defendants hinted that the verdict was up to them, the jury, alone. There's a picture here of some of the Shell 7. You can see Senan on the left here with a bag of spray paints, and Jane and Dave here with their vandalising equipment. They were handed back to them at the end of the trial when they walked away as free men and women. So such a verdict is known as a perverse verdict because the jury went against what the judge had directed. And I thought we might be able to do the same type of thing. So as Terry mentioned, as part of my defence, I wrote a technical paper about the need for much better house insulation. And it's published in a peer-reviewed journal. This is the first bit of the title page. The co-author, by the way, is a senior academic at Loughborough Uni, a really good bloke. So I later received 2.5 kilos of papers from the CPS outlining the prosecution case. But then Judge Reed published his 28-page pre-trial ruling. He cited precedent in law, and he claimed to show that none of the legal defences we planned to make could be used. In short, we'd quite literally not be allowed to defend our actions in his court of law. So his reasoning went like this. As we had no valid defences, according to him, our actions had been unlawful, and therefore our motivations for doing them was immaterial. And therefore, anything touching on our motivations was inadmissible, which meant that we couldn't say it. So climate change, insulation, fuel poverty, etc., were all part of our motivation, and therefore could not be mentioned on pain of imprisonment for contempt of court. We could not try to justify the protest because he had ruled it was unjustifiable, and if we tried, we would be imprisoned for contempt of court. And that's not all. We couldn't say that we thought the trial was unfair. We couldn't say that we thought the protest would do any good. We couldn't claim there was any excuse for the protest. We couldn't mention other protest movements, such as the suffragettes and civil rights movements and so on. And we could not ask the jury to consider the case in any way other than how the judge will direct them. A couple of other kind of things. This is part of the ambit of evidence, what can be used for evidence and what cannot, according to the judge. So the top line here, it says, evidence may also not be given as to any positive reaction by any driver, any motorist or anything like that. But in clause 47, the angry reaction of motorists is relevant. It's relevant evidence for the jury to consider. So they can mention angry reactions, but we couldn't mention positive reactions. Things were stacked pretty heavily against us from the start. The only topic up for argument was whether or not we caused a public nuisance, according to the legal definition of that crime. How many people were delayed and for exactly how long. It was clear I would not be allowed to even mention the title of my technical paper, let alone mention its findings. We were forbidden from using the word insulation anyway. So the trials were arranged with 3 or 4 defendants per trial, and each trial took about a week. So there were 50 trials altogether. So the trials were scheduled to take the whole of 2023 to work through. I sat through 2 of them, taking notes to help future defendants, including me, to prepare cases. The judge said that if anyone wished to have character references read out, they would have to submit them to the prosecution to delete anything that went against the judge's ruling, like any mentions of climate, etc. And the censorship was rigorous. And defendants were warned repeatedly to be very careful about what they said. The picture of the inner London Crown Court, which I got to know pretty well. So the judge, Judge Reed, was a highly intelligent and articulate man, and he made great play of being totally fair. But it became clear to me that he wanted to get convictions, and he would go as far as he could go to get convictions. So defendants defended themselves very well in the first trial, pushing the legal ruling very hard, and they got a not guilty verdict. But after that, the judge tightened up the rules. He didn't want another not guilty verdict. In the next couple of trials, there were convictions, and there was growing anger amongst the perceived unfairness of the trials. A couple of protests outside court against the judge, Judge Silas Reid, in which he told the jury to just ignore anything he saw outside court. But he was pretty unsettled by it, I think. But some defendants decided to openly state their motives for taking the actions that they took, including the deliberate use of forbidden words, such as climate change and fuel poverty. They wanted to tell the whole truth. They waited until their final summing up and then said their piece. The judge would order the jury to leave the room immediately, and the defendants were told to be silent, but they went on speaking until the jury had left. Then they were hauled up before the furious judge on a charge of contempt of court. And unless they apologised and said it was a mistake, they were sentenced to an immediate term in jail. In the media, prison sentences for mentioning fuel poverty were not playing out well for the judge, but it was difficult now to row back on his rulings. In one of the last trials, he forgave a deliberate contempt of court. I think he must have realised that he had gone a bit too far. So the jury rights are now becoming, getting called into question. So in pre-trial hearings, the judge said about the Shell 7 verdict that the jury had had no right to reach their perverse verdict. But in fact, the jury have every right to come to whatever verdict they choose. It was clear that Judge Reed was doing everything he could to make sure there would be no perverse verdict in his court. The judge always said to the jury, "I am the judge of the law, and you have to follow the directions I will give you in my summing up." The judge tells the jury that they have to look at the case in the way that he will direct them. Defendants not allowed to ask the jury to consider the case in any other way. Judge Reed does not want the jury to know that they have a right to judge the case as they see fit. In fact, he directs them otherwise. Flyers began to appear up and down the road outside the court, stating the legal right of juries to come to their own verdicts. The judge was badly rattled, and he ordered the police to remove the posters, but more kept appearing. And at the start of court one morning, he said furiously that he had personally ripped down 8 on the way in. But the flyers were, after all, only stating the law, as it had been since Magna Carta, and as it was confirmed 350 years ago in Bushel's case. I'm nearly finished. In my case, I was ill. It was due to be in March, but I was ill. And so my co-defendants put up a great defence. They got a split jury. And then Trudy Warner came on the scene, and all further trials were postponed. My trial is now rescheduled for January. So the verdict so far whole mix of verdicts really, all for the same offence. 4 found not guilty, 9 awaiting retrial, because they had a split jury, 16 found guilty, all for exactly the same offence. The sentences, if you didn't renounce doing the same thing again, is immediate prison. If you promise not to reoffend, you got a suspended prison sentence, 80 to 100 hours community service, and up to £3,500 costs, according to your means. So heavy punishments for trying to get the government to act like a responsible government. So I'll leave you with a bit for Trudy. He's actually on the call at the moment, which is lovely. I think Val is going to pick up the story from here. So thank you.
Wow, I knew some of that, but I have not heard all of it, and I can't believe the logical process that Judge Reed was setting out there. So really appreciate you setting that out for us. So we move on now to Val Saunders, fellow Stroudy. Val was an illustrator in Oxford, working with educational publishers, left to go freelance, and then moved to Stroud and started working with young people at Stroud College in Arts and Crafts. She is an artist for Just Up Oil and for Insulate Britain and for Extinction Rebellion. So welcome, Val, over to you.
Hi, Andy, that was amazing. I'm so pleased you did so much of that, because that's the bit that worried me. There's so much information in there. And it's shocking when you kind of see it, the way you laid it out. And well done for taking all those notes. That's real, that's so important and so helpful. So a lot of that you sort of covered anyway. I just wanted to say, I found something from somebody's story that it will say, it will probably go over some of what you've already explained. But this is in her words. It might be a statement to her solicitor, but this is her experience. I was not allowed to say the words insulation, food or fuel poverty, climate breakdown, cost of living, or indeed anything that could explain why I sat on the roads. So there would be no context for the jury to draw on. I realised then that I wouldn't even be able to take the oath, which frames the case at the beginning of the trial, because I couldn't swear to tell the whole truth, as Judge Silas Reed had forbidden me to tell the whole truth. And I would be in perjury if I did take the oath. So there, I mean, it's just an unbelievable situation, isn't it? I can't even remember. I mean, I was following all the action and following some of the chats about how various trials were going. And this business of disallowing all these really important parts of someone's defence. So when Trudy, who I had met previously, her action to stand outside the Inner London Crown Court, where IB defendants were on trial, holding her homemade placard, was a response to the judiciary clamping down. And these acquittals. And the fact, I mean, I know a couple of people that were imprisoned because they said that what they wanted to say and they were in contempt. I mean, I think it was like 8 weeks for a couple of people, which is beyond, well, there's so many people in civil resistance that have been imprisoned. But the wording she used was an updated version of what's on the outside of the Old Bailey, back in 1670 with the 2 Quakers case. So she updated the words, and her version was, jurors, you have an absolute right to acquit a defendant according to your conscience. So it is actually, it's more of a personal statement to the jurors. Anyway, she was arrested the next day. Do tell me if I'm getting any of this wrong, Trudy. She was arrested with two other people, I think, from fly posting some of those posters you were talking about. There was also a group with her who were just holding photocopies of that Old Bailey plaque. I don't think they were arrested. So I got involved. The shout went out on social media, and I thought, I really want to get involved in this. So in solidarity with Trudy, which I think is the most important thing to show solidarity in this kind of case, it's about democracy, and it's about, you know, losing the power of our juries. So that was back in May, and 24 of us followed incredibly accurate and well thought out guidelines, and we went to the Inner London Crown Court where her original action had taken place, and we sat at intervals and we knew what we were doing. I'd actually made the signs, the placards. I was happy to help because that's something I can do. And we sat in a sort of quiet vigil, not to really interact with passers-by because there were supporters and spokespeople to do that. And we were just there for an hour early in the morning for when the jurors arrived or anybody else so they could see us. But we didn't interact with jurors. We didn't interact with anybody. Some people did ask questions. We were some of us held the same wording that Trudy held on our plaque. Some had the Old Bailey wording, and some had a kind of variation on Trudy's. And when these actions take place, a letter is written, which is then given to the judge of the day. At that point, it was Silas Reed, I think, and explaining to him so that he knows that we're outside, explaining to him why we're there, what we're doing, and how strongly we feel about it. And most people added their names to this letter with their occupations, which later identified us, and which later led to a letter being received by all of us from the police to attend an interview, which I have had mine, but there's still plenty of people that are still waiting to be interviewed by the Met. So that's, you know, you're sort of really challenging it. You know you're going to be identified, but you want to go in and challenge this whole this attack on rights. Anyway, my interview was the end of September, and the solicitors that have been amazing and supporting us throughout Hodge, Jones and Allen, they are happy to you know, be present, to help us, to support us, and most of us had a pre-written statement, and some people didn't even will just ignore the interview request, but I was doing care work, so I felt it was right just to you know, respond and actually turn up, because otherwise they may come looking for you and that might compromise work, etc., etc. But I went with a statement and a no comment to all the questions, which were endless. And after that, there were subsequent actions at Isleworth in July, where 10 people sat outside, and on that occasion, no, more than 10, I think. I think I'm getting my Isleworths mixed up, but we did sit outside Isleworth, and at that point, the jury was discharged, and that particular trial was rescheduled. When people did find out what we were doing, they were really surprised and kind of shocked, and thought that it was common knowledge that the jurors would have this power and use their conscience. And then following that, a national action day on Monday, the 25th of September, where up to, I think it was about 100 people at 25 Crown Courts around the country, you know, carried out the action under the same guidelines. Most were sitting, some were standing, just for an hour in the morning. And the media was starting to get very interested. We were sending out press releases, and photographs were taken of most people. A lot of when we did that action outside Gloucester Crown Court, it was great to see a lot of Gloucester people that I knew through XR, but they'd never been in an action where there was a risk of a small risk of being arrested. But we never saw police at any of the actions. You might see a security man just coming to check us out and see what we're doing. But most of the Gloucester crew had never been arrested, and they felt really good about doing this. And we always said, you know, you can get up and the police do have to warn you before they arrest you. So there is a get out clause. So, and I think they were really pleased they did it. And we have a debrief afterwards, which is great actually, because you get to hear everybody's feelings, how it went for them, and how, you know, just it's really good to let out your feelings and how it went. What was I going to say? We do ask people if they're going to be doing these actions that they've done NVDA, which is nonviolent direct action. It's always good to be trained up as much as you can, just to safeguard, because, you know, any little, you know, if there's any kind of resistance, especially with the police, they will get you. So it's really important to be non-violent in the way that your body language, the way you speak, exactly, you know, it's a really important thing. And of course, we want the media to see this non-violent civil resistance happening the way we want it to happen. I don't know whether Trudy wants to bring us up to date at the end of this, but I think she's now expecting a letter back from the Conservative MP Michael Tomlinson, who's a Solicitor General, for her to answer the charge of contempt of court, which is a juryless trial, I think I'm right in saying. And he's since passed future cases onto the Met, who will possibly charge those identified later on, subsequently, with perverting the course of justice, which carries a more serious penalty. So we're just still waiting for that to see what happens. And it was just good to see friends from Gloucestershire getting involved, people I know in different parts of the country. And just to say, I'm proud to have made around 60 signs to date, 60 placards. So I'm a bit bannered out. And that's pretty much it from me.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Val. Really brilliant to hear your journey. And I have personal experience of your fantastic signs, so I know how powerful they are. But I think Trudy has had to step off the call because she has a visitor. But it was really helpful to have some of her story through your eyes as well. So thank you. We're going to move on now to Jonathan. So John Fuller has been an environmental campaigner for 45 years. He was in the roads protest movement in the 1980s. He ran the speed limit campaign in the 90s, which resulted in government agreeing to dramatically reduce child pedestrian fatalities on UK roads. He campaigned against the expansion of Southend Airport, ran the No Estuary Airport campaign in Essex, led the Friends of the Earth successful campaigns for the construction of wind farms in the Dengie Peninsula in Essex, stood for the Green Party in South West constituency in May 2015. He's a speaker for XR, he's been arrested twice at XR actions, and he provides specialist tell the truth advice to the radical climate movement on media coverage of the CEE, and leads work on the Climate Genocide Act Now group, which is using international criminal law in the context of climate breakdown. Wow. Jonathan, over to you.
All right, well, thank you very much indeed for having me on. In light of our previous two speakers, I'm going to see if I can just show people this from The Guardian. This was published on the 27th of September, and it shows a photograph of Trudy holding her sign up outside the court. And it's written by a highly respected experts in criminal law. And it refers to the dark secret of it. It says, has the dark secret of English courts been exposed? And that dark secret is, of course, what Trudy referred to. The fact that jurors have an absolute right to acquit on the basis of their conscience. Now, I was at the first Defend Our Juries action at Isleworth and sat down outside the court. And due to other commitments, I haven't had a chance to attend other ones. But I want to bring to people's attention a key issue here that a number of defendants involved in Just Stop Oil, a couple in Insulate Britain and a couple in Extinction Rebellion actions, people who are trying to use the evidence that the group I represent now, Climate Genocide Act now, the evidence that we provide. And it goes right to the heart of this issue of your right to a fair trial. Article 6 of Human Rights Act 1998 guarantees people the right to a fair trial, and it's an absolute right. It's not like the right to freedom of speech that is qualified. You balance one person's right against others. Article 6 is an absolute right. Now, what the group I represent, Climate Genocide Act now, what we did was to look at international criminal law and see whether there was anything in the legislation that would allow us to tackle mass killings caused by climate breakdown. I assume everybody on this call knows that hundreds of thousands of people are killed a year by climate change, and that we've begun a process that is slowly leading to the annihilation of low-lying island states. I don't think I need to go into the science of that or explain that, but we can provide people with all the references to prove that. What may come as a surprise to some people in the criminal justice system is that it is actually a criminal offence to completely annihilate another nation. It's actually part of genocide legislation. You're not allowed to completely destroy a civilian population, an entire nation. And you're not allowed to collapse the agricultural supply of areas like the Sahel region in North Africa, or drive 140 million people into hunger and starvation in the Horn of Africa, killing 100,000 people. And these are consequences of the policies that drive climate breakdown. These are choices that people make. Now, under international criminal law, if you look at the legislation, there are concepts of direct intent. I hate a particular population, I'm going to kill them all. And oblique intent. That may mean that you don't hate that population, but you know with a high degree of certainty that if you pursue a certain course of action, you are going to cause mass loss of life. And of course, with climate change, climate breakdown, we know with absolute certainty what we're doing to the Greenland ice sheet and glaciers, what we're doing to, as regards the oceans and rising sea levels. We know that with absolute certainty, and we know that with absolute certainty that we've begun a process that will annihilate Tuvalu, Vanuatu, the Marshall Islands, Solomon Islands, the Maldives, and other low-lying island states. The number of states to be removed from the map is dependent upon how quickly we decarbonise and whether we make an effort to undo the immense harm that we've done. Now, in this international criminal law was brought into UK legislation by virtue of the International Criminal Court Act 2001. So we actually have that legislation in UK law. So back in 2019, November 2019, on the anniversary of the Nuremberg trials, we organised for 39 people to take a dossier of evidence to their local police station and hand it in and ask for a criminal investigation against named senior politicians in the UK. It was a detailed dossier of evidence detailing the policies that drive climate breakdown and show that politicians contribute to mass loss of life. They have common purpose, or what's often referred to as joint enterprise. They have a common purpose as others who also support very high carbon lifestyles and activities. The case was allocated to the Metropolitan Police, a specialist division called SO15, which is part of Counter-Terrorism Command. And quite quickly in December 2019, they rejected it. And they said that there had to be intent to commit the crimes for there to be any chance of a successful prosecution. So we spent months explaining to them this concept of oblique intent, and they just refused to answer our correspondence. And this went backwards and forwards for months, and then we went through appeal processes, and the whole thing took a couple of years. The case was sent off to the International Criminal Court, where it then sat with the International Criminal Court saying we don't have jurisdiction, it being bounced back to the UK for us to explore other options within the UK jurisdiction. In 2022, thanks to the enormous effort of people in insulate Britain, an Extinction Rebellion, and then some people who have been prosecuted for Just Stop Oil actions, we found a way to make a breakthrough. In courts, quite often when people are on trial, a judge would rebuke a defendant and say that no one is above the law. You don't have the right to take the law into your own hands. The law applies to everybody, and is for the criminal justice system to administer the law without fear or favour. And they would rebuke people who had taken disruptive climate actions. So we wrote to every single judge where we heard their name and a court where they heard a trial involving a climate protester. And we explained to them that their words were being completely undermined by the police. We explained that, in fact, we don't have a fair criminal justice system because the police refused to use legislation enacted by Parliament that would result in the prosecution of politicians if they continued to kill by the policies that drive climate breakdown. And we said that all of these trials were unfair. They breached Article 6, and all of the judges' comments were completely undermined by what the Met Police were doing. Now, this put many judges in a very awkward position. And so, as far as we can tell, what actually happened was that they wrote to the Metropolitan Police and said to the Met, you're going to have to explain yourselves. You're going to have to explain yourselves in detail why you think this legislation doesn't apply. So in January 2023, we heard from the Metropolitan Police an actual acknowledgement, first time ever, yes, we will answer your correspondence in a meaningful way. What happened in March and April 2023 was that we received detailed letters from lawyers acting for the Metropolitan Police. And this is the Directorate of Legal Services at the Met. And we answered their correspondence. We led them through the process and we showed them that their thinking was critically flawed. By July the 27th, on July the 27th, 2023, we delivered the fatal blow in correspondence, and it was listing all the agreed facts, everything they did not dispute, and their case was left in tatters. On July the 28th, myself and my wife, the most extraordinary thing happened. We received a death threat from the Metropolitan Police, from somebody acting on their behalf. And we thought, what on earth has this country come to? What on earth has happened to our criminal justice system? We were gobsmacked that this should happen. Obviously, we're not the kind of people to be intimidated. And we keep going. A number of people on this call perhaps are aware of the nature of what that threat was. But I won't go into that now. What's crucial here is what happens next, and that is that we are giving witness statements to defendants when they go into court. What we're asking people to do is to, as soon as they're charged and they've received their notice of prosecution from the Crown Prosecution Service or the court, that they say that their Article 6 rights are being infringed, that they have no chance of a fair trial in a situation where the police protect those who kill but prosecute those peacefully trying to stop the killers. And we give people a lot of detailed information. Some people are trying to defend themselves in a slightly different way. They just take the correspondence from us that there has been between the lawyers acting from the police, and they present that as evidence that they attach to their defences to prove that we have a corrupt criminal justice system that protects the killers but prosecutes those trying to stop the killers. Some people are taking this quite some way and saying, with respect to the court, that this is an ongoing situation because despite us now telling the court that this is actually happening and proving it to your satisfaction that this has happened, you still will proceed with a prosecution against me. So it's obvious I cannot receive a fair trial. The significance of defend our juries in all of this is that this is a crucial piece of evidence that judges are desperate to keep away from juries. They do not want this evidence to be admitted into court. We are having some instances where judges have said, well, we won't let you use the witness statement for one technical reason or another, but we are going to allow you to refer to it. And we've had 2 cases recently where there have been acquittals, where the Climate Genocide Act now case has been referred to in court. So we think this has a lot of potential. We cannot use it so long as people like Judge Silas Reed refuse to allow juries to hear such crucial evidence. The significance, I'm sure everybody can gather, and that is that if we put this evidence by one means or another before juries, then what happens is that we will get far more acquittals. If the government of the day finds it cannot secure convictions against climate change protesters, then it forces the government of the day to reach the conclusion we all want them to reach, which is, you know what, I'm going to decarbonise. I'm going to stop killing people. I'm not going to contribute towards mass death. And that ultimately is what we want. So to wrap up, I would say to everybody that no matter what your involvement is here, everybody should have the briefing notes from Climate Genocide Act. Now we provide people with briefing notes, and I would urge everybody to ensure that if you know anybody considering getting involved in dynamic climate protest, please make sure they know of our case and get the briefing notes from us. So that's me.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, John. Really valuable to have your technical expertise here tonight, and the work you're doing is incredible. I'm sure we will have questions. I can see people clapping you in the background, but we will come to those at the end, as I said. So we're going to move on now to our final speaker, Tim Hewlett. And Tim is an astrophysicist. He has a PhD from St Andrews back in 2018, and as an activist, he was co-founder of Scientist Rebellion. So over to you, Tim.
Thank you. And just before I start, John, can I just say I really wanted to make those arguments in court. I tried in my own way in a couple of times, so thank you so much for this work. I think it's brilliant. So, yep, hello everyone. I am Tim, and I'll just briefly describe 2 trials that I had earlier this year, and then I'll try to situate some of this in a slightly wider political, geopolitical, economic context, if there's time. So, the 2 trials that I had earlier this year, one of them was from the founding action of Scientist Rebellion back in 2020. At the Royal Society, which is an old, prestigious institution of science, and one was at Shell HQ in London about a year and a half ago. Now, I think I was given a lot more freedom to speak than many activists are. I think probably just because I have a doctorate and a fairly posh voice. I doubt there's much more to it than that. But just to say, you know, what other speakers have been talking about the threats of imprisonment, just for mentioning the climate crisis, for instance, things like that have a really chilling effect outside of the domain where they operate. So before, when I was trying to prepare for these trials, I was left in the position thinking, how can I, you know, what can I do to prepare for this when I have no idea what it is I'm even going to be allowed to talk about? How can you prepare a defense in that context? And actually, it even fed into my decision to self-represent, because I thought, you know, if a judge tells a solicitor you're not allowed to talk about this, the solicitor doesn't really have a choice. They have to obey the judge. I at least have a choice there of I can stand in contempt if I wish to. If that's a matter of principle, which is important enough, then I can choose that. So although I was given more freedom than many activists, still it was extremely constrained. So not only did he, as in pretty much every other case that has happened recently in the last couple of years, he directed the jury to say, you know, you can't consider any wider context, don't think about any question beyond the fact of, did he do this on this day? Was he there? Did he do this action? Please don't think about anything else. And various legal arguments were completely ruled out from the outset, even, sorry. So the only argument available to us was called the defense of consent, which is basically the argument that if they understood why I did it, they wouldn't object. Now, in the case of the Royal Society, that fit reasonably well, because we were trying to get scientists involved in activism. So there was a reasonable kind of argument struck around that. It's a bit harder with Shell, where you're simultaneously saying, you know, these CEOs are well aware of the fact that they are committing genocide. They know the crimes that they are guilty of. And that's why they are doing everything they can to manipulate democratic processes like the courts in order to avoid accountability. It's quite difficult to simultaneously make that point and also claim, well, if they really got it, then they wouldn't mind. So unfortunately, I lost the Shell case, but we did win the Royal Society case. Pretty much all of the evidence that I tried to submit was rejected. I think I submitted 46 pieces of evidence and 3 were accepted in the end. The others were all barred as inadmissible, including eyewitnesses, expert witnesses, other testimony and other forms of evidence. One I recall was a leaked Shell document in which it's literally a paragraph saying predicting the rise of activists against Shell around about the year 2020 in response to their actions. And you think, if that's not admissible, it's kind of akin to saying that you can lock someone in a room and then blame them for kicking down the door. You know you've set the conditions for this. That's clearly relevant, but far from the most egregious. But we can contrast this with the other side of the equation. So Shell, for instance, changed their story the way through the case and was never required to submit any evidence to justify the claims. So initially they claimed I'd done £4,999 of damage, which is coincidentally just £1 short of what's required for a jury trial. After I argued that I should be permitted a jury, I wanted a chance to defend myself. They put in a new statement saying that I'd done actually more like 50,000 or 70,000 pounds of damage. And then during the trial, literally slap bang in the middle of the trial, it was on the 2nd or 3rd day during lunch, they submitted a new statement saying that I'd done 100 to 120,000 pounds worth of damage. This was all from a splash of paint, by the way, which I know was washed off on the same day. And the reason why they couldn't supply any material evidence to demonstrate that this might be true is because there wasn't any. It was just a flagrant lie. But it was accepted, and evidence that proved that they were lying was blocked. So, you know, I'm aware of the fact that I was given a lot more freedom than most, and still it was a farce. When you compare it to, you know, when Andy describes the process of going through the IB trials, well, there's a name for that. That's a show trial. There's no other way of describing that. At least I had some opportunity to defend myself, but you shouldn't need a doctorate to be allowed to tell the truth in a court of law. So let's try and situate this in a slightly wider context then, and say, why is it that power centers of the world are so determined to clamp down like this? Why are we seeing this escalation of repression against activists and this silencing of truth by escalating tactics across the board? It's not just in the courts, but we're also seeing increased protest law, clamping down on unions, clamping down on free speech online, and all sorts of other venues where we see these similar trends playing out. And I would break it down into basically 2 segments of explanation. And one of those is just a question of raw economic power. So I think one thing that's really important to understand is that there is basically no conceivable way to make a sustainable economy that is predicated on endless growth, right? So if you are making the argument as an environmentalist that decarbonisation is absolutely essential to survival, what that amounts to is an argument that capitalism has to end, that industrial capitalism cannot persist. And so that brings out capitalist forces from around the world to try and crush environmentalists by any means necessary in order to prolong the state of affairs, to prolong their personal power, their economic power for as long as possible, even though that's a fool's errand, even though that makes inevitable genocide, social breakdown, collapse of food systems, and so on. It's not really relevant to the logics at play. And basically that's why, because governments are primarily beholden to the power brokers of society, who are the richest. And so that's why if you call the cops on somebody who's burgled your house, you'll wait days or maybe forever to get a visit. But if you go to Shell or some other important economic institution and hold a placard peacefully, you'll have the police on you in moments. Right? It's a really good example of how power operates in the relationship between state power and corporate power. And the second arm of it, I would say, is just fear of justice. Because these people, many of those people in power are well aware of the crimes that they commit. They know that in a world of accountability and justice, it is they who would be on trial. And so to avoid justice, they seek to destroy the justice system. So we are in quite a dark situation. And as the climate and ecology continue to break down ever faster, I fear that's going to get much worse. It is more essential than ever that we safeguard our freedoms in the courts, our right to tell the truth, to have that venue to hold power to account. Else we are quickly going to descend into quite a nightmare. I would really like to finish on a more positive note, but that's so depressing. I'll just say this to try to find kind of amusing. I was quite amazed to see, it's kind of a good example of the relationship between corporate power and state power today. I was amazed to find that the judge doesn't have absolute jurisdiction in the courtroom. My co-defendant was already in prison for another charge. And so he was brought to the courtroom by the security guards. And they had jurisdiction over the judge as to how he was allowed to present his case. So, judge, he might be able to stop you from speaking about, context or reality or truth or anything important, but he can be overruled by a security guard who claims that a peace activist is some sort of threat to the jury. He's going to lunge at them wildly. So I'll just finish there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tim, and thanks for attempting to finish on a happy note, because I think we all feel that sort of chilling effect and the dark situation that we find ourselves in. And thanks also for setting it in a more international context. That was really helpful. So I'd like to invite people to turn your cameras back on if you'd like to, so we can see everyone that's in the room, and open the floor to questions to our speakers, or if you just have a view that you'd like to express on this subject, then please do. If you're able to use your hand, because I can't see everybody, but the hands will pop up on the participant list, the online hand, that would be really useful. I just wondered, while people are collecting their thoughts, whether anyone could say anything about whether Judge Silas Reed's sort of attitude and position, whether you have a sense of whether that reflects the wider judiciary at the moment. Is he a one-off that, could somehow be avoided, or is there a wider movement that we should be more concerned about? But does anyone have any thoughts on that one?
Can I say something?
Oh, go on. Yeah, go on. You carry on. Otherwise, I'll chip in. I'll be quiet. Go on. You carry on.
Well, I was just going to come from a slightly different angle, which may or may not be relevant. And I know I'm amongst friends, and though some of you know anyway that I'm climate activist and a magistrate. And I thought, I don't want to feel defensive and feel I have to sort of defend the criminal justice system, because I don't think I have to but there's something for me about us being clear who it is that is the problem, and just that the people who work in the court system, and the legal advisors and the magistrates and judges to a certain extent are following law that has been set, by the government and by, I know judges set precedent, so they do have more of a they do have more power, but a lot of people are following legal guidelines, and when they say things are not admissible, or that you can't do this, that and the other, they're not just deciding that because they don't like the people in front of them in court. They're saying that because that's what the book of law that they've got on the table in front of them says they have to say. So we have to be kind of careful about who it is that's saying you can't do these things, and make sure that we're campaigning against the right people. I absolutely support all the campaigns you're already talking about, but we need to make sure that it's sort of going in the right direction.
Can I chip back in and just say something about that? I've sat in a number of courts and listened to a number of trials, and I would say that I've sat in 3 other trials apart from Judge Silas Reed cases where judges have said you're not allowed to talk about climate change. So other judges are allowing it. So this is clear that there's inconsistency there. Some judges believe that it is an important factor that defendants should be allowed to make reference to it, and other judges perhaps feel that they want to get their conviction, they want to secure a conviction, they are biased, and they're determined to prevent a fair trial.
Thank you for that perspective. That's very helpful. And thank you, Sally. Sorry, I couldn't get myself off mute for some reason. So I've got a question to you, actually, John, from Vay Straker. And Vay's asking, can you explain how acquittals will lead to the government capitulating to climate demands?
If we reach a situation where 80 or 90% of climate protest cases result in acquittals, you're going to find far more people coming forward and taking dynamic forms of climate protest action. At the moment, the legislation has a chilling effect on protest. And if the public at large realise that they have the right to acquit on the basis of their conscience, then we will get more and more acquittals. I think it's very likely indeed that if the government cannot secure convictions and more people feel that they're at liberty to take dynamic forms of climate protest action, we will force a crisis. Non-violent direct action will force that crisis, because there will be more and more people coming out, sitting in roads, protesting, taking dynamic forms of action, and the government will just say, well, we can't win here. The courts and the juries won't let us. The jury acts as part of the democratic process. It is part of checks and balances to ensure that an oppressive state does not crush innocent or good people. And that will be exposed. If juries keep on acquitting, the government's callous and disregard for justice will be exposed. So it's not just an opinion. I think that there is good, solid evidence to suggest that if we get a lot of acquittals, government has to change.
So Barbara's question actually coincidentally was similar to mine, but a question from Karen. Karen, did you want to ask your question?
Yes. What can we do to support those who have been found guilty or who are in prison?
Any of your panelists like to respond to that one? Val?
Well, there is a climate action support group, and I can send, and there's all sorts of there are addresses and ways and means to contact people who are in prison, but there is a support group for arrestees and climate activists. So I can I'm not clever enough to probably do it on here, but I can send you, Karen, any information.
Brilliant, thank you, Val. And any other panelists want to comment on that one before we move on? I've got about 3 different bits of my screen open, so do just step in if you'd like to speak.
A very brief point from me. I attended a legal roundtable with representatives from Insulate Britain, XR, JSO, Liberty, various lawyers at the beginning of September. At that legal roundtable, the representative from Netpol said that he was firmly of the belief that the number of arrests that will be taking place will increase dramatically as climate continues to break down and people suffer more and more. And he said that one of our gaps was, as a movement, an inability or poor ability to support people who are in prison. And he said he appealed to us and our movement to do far more to support those who are committed to prison. And obviously Val's made a reference to that support group. And you know, it is true that every single one of us should be able to at least send an email and maybe go and visit somebody who's in prison.
Yeah, thank you. That's great to hear. Oh, and Tim has tagged in the chat one prisoner support group that you might like to take a look at. Anyone who's interested in that. Right, Alan Mossman, would you like to ask your question?
Thank you, Chloe. Has there been a critique of Judge Reed's opinion before the case that Andy talked about? A legal critique, Andy?
Yeah, Alan, there is a case going through the appeal court at the moment against Judge Reed's pre-trial ruling. It started back in April. I don't quite know how it's going now, but it's going through the appeal court as far as I know. So that's hopeful. So maybe when the cases start again in 2024, maybe the basis of the cases will be a bit different. We don't know yet, though. I think that's one of the reasons why they abandoned the IB trials or postponed them for a while, to let this appeal go through.
Okay, thanks, Andy. Did you put your hand up as well, Tim?
I was scratching my face actually, but I do actually have a bit of a question for John. I was just wondering, might be a bit of a depressing line again, but what prospect do you think there is that if we have more success in the courts, what we've seen before is that when we succeeded in the courts, the government clamped down on the courts. You got top-down directives that banned legal arguments and so on. What hope do you have that victory in the courts will actually lead to victories in a broader society rather than further repression and dismantling of the democratic state?
Well, we're using international criminal law, and that, as I said earlier, was brought into UK law by ICCA 2001. Now, the only way out of this is to say we're withdrawing from the International Criminal Court. Now, that would be a really embarrassing thing for a government to do. The other important aspect of the Climate Genocide Act Now case is we talked to a lot of other campaign groups in Europe and other parts of the world, New Zealand, Australia, and we are working with other campaign groups to bring cases of their own to the International Criminal Court. So this is a growing area. There is already another case at the International Criminal Court from a group called UK Youth Climate Coalition, and they have a case there against BP. And the ICC has to announce by December, they get a year, by December they have to say whether they're going to take the case on or not. Now, I have received expert legal opinion on the International Criminal Court, and it's clear that our arguments and the arguments used by UK Youth Climate Coalition they stack up. Our arguments are completely valid. In law, our case is solid, but the ICC is a political body and it will take guidance from key governments that support it and fund it. And so that is the warning that we've been given, is that you may think that the law is the law and everybody has to adhere to the law, but there really are some people who are above the law. So this is going to be a long fight. It's going to be protracted. It's going to take several years, but climate change is only going one way, and more people are going to look for justice. Okay.
Thank you very much, John. Okay, so I've got a little comment from Vey pointing out, just going back to the Assistance for Prisoners, that Exile Marches has a letter writing group, so that's handy to know. And then I've got a hand up from Desir Neal, so over to you. Apologies if I haven't said your name quite right.
I'm just in the middle of the.
Thank you. It's Si.
My question is this.
Oh, Barbara, sorry, I'm on Desir at the moment. I'll come to you afterwards if that's okay.
Sorry. I accidentally got.
So, sorry, my question is a very simple, naive question. How are all these cases paid for, and you know, when the rulings are put out? Because the last speaker actually talked about, you know, £100,000. So I'm assuming that would have been against you. So I'm just interested to know how these defence cases, etc., are paid for. And then if you lose the case, you know, the costs against you, legal costs, as well as, you know, personal costs. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Is somebody able to respond to that one?
Is that one more for Andy? I don't know.
That's for Tim.
Yeah, I mean, I had a fine for my first case, and it was over £400, and a few people chipped in, and it was all, you know, paid for. So a lot of us use either just talk to friends and we share the burden together, and sometimes people do crowdfunders. I think Andy, your case was quite a bit more expensive, wasn't it?
Yeah, so if you're found guilty, the actual costs were about £3,500. That was according to means. If you didn't have anything at all, you ended up not paying costs, but it could have been up to 3,500. And I think some people got other people to help, but most of us were self-representing, and so we didn't have any legal costs to pay.
Tim, do you want to go?
Sure. There's also, I mean, nowadays there's a lot more infrastructure in terms of groups helping with these costs sometimes. So Extinction Rebellion has a legal fund, Scientist Rebellion has a legal fund. And so there's generally a kind of mixed model of paying for these things. But also to clarify, you know, in my case, for instance, the claim was that I'd done £100,000 of damage, but that doesn't mean that you get £100,000 worth of fine. My fine in the end was about £1,000 with a suspended prison sentence.
Val, did you want to chip in as well?
Yeah, there was an injunction put onto the after the Insulate Britain actions, because everything's injuncted now anyway, and the injunction costs came to something like 800,000, because after what, you know, Andy showed you, we had absolute, you know, it was huge amounts were turning up, paper, duplicates, nothing online, you know, package after package after package turning up at your door with, you know, body cammed men in black, which is all very intimidating. And which I actually did some artwork from all the injunction papers and turned it into some kind of project. But yeah, so it started out something like 800,000, which was then reduced. And I don't know the details, but actually we're paying off a down payment of 1,500, and then we were actually bailed out by another group and paid off HL, you know, Highways and their solicitors in a lump sum. So, you know, they're huge amounts. These injunctions cost a fortune because of all the, you know, the office work involved and all the rest of it. I mean, that's just an injunction, but I didn't even break an injunction, but I'm still having to pay. So, you know, as Tim said, groups help each other if they have the means. And, you know, if, you know, there are donors who want to help, but there's you know, we shouldn't have to be paying these sums in the first place. Plus we've all, you know, we've done community payback, which is a bit of a joke because I feel I've done my community service already.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more with that. So I think, Barbara, you were trying to ask a question before, so over to you now. You come back if you want to, Barbara. So Becky Hall, you were just raising the question of whether a judge can sit on more than one XR judgment, and Graham pointed out that he's had the same judge twice. Did anyone, any of our panelists, want to comment on that? Is there any restriction about how many times the same judges can be involved in this sort of thing, and in particular Judge Reed, for example? Any thoughts on that one?
I mean, I'll just confirm, I'm not sure if there is a limit.
Okay.
I remember one judge saying that he was very sympathetic to Extinction Rebellion protesters. This was in the early days, and he made a remark that I don't think they, probably referring, I don't know, to the judicial office in the High Court, that they allow us to hear too many of these cases for fear that we'll become too sympathetic towards you. So presumably there is a limit, but I really don't know. I'm sorry.
No, that's helpful. Alan, did you want to come in and say a bit about what's happening in The Hague at the moment?
I will try. There's a motorway that runs into the centre of The Hague, comes in by Central Station. It's the A12 motorway, which you may have heard of. In the last few weeks, there's been a continuing protest on that motorway, blocking that motorway 24/7, as far as I understand. And in the course of those protests, 9,000 people have been arrested. And because of all the arrests, more and more people have turned up to protest. Unfortunately, not my brother, who lives just up the road. In the last couple of days, the Dutch police have turned to the government and said, we can't continue to do this. Please stop funding, subsidizing, and approving oil, gas, and coal investment. And I believe, I'm not absolutely certain, that the Dutch Parliament, which is also in The Hague, has agreed. So protest can work. The messages I've been getting from the I suppose inaction on my part with Just Stop Oil. I've been a supporter rather than an actor, but I've now decided to get arrested, even if it means I can't go and see my son in Canada. If the government will agree to stop investing in this country, will agree to stop investing and supporting oil, gas, and coal, fossil fuels, whatever you want to call them, then we're going to stop protesting because we've achieved what we wanted to. And a lot of the government's actions have been to try and stop the protest. In the next note in the chat, I've put a link to an interview by Nick Robinson with one of our neighbours here in Stroud, Roger Hallam, one of the founders of XR and one of the people behind Just Stop Oil. It is an absolutely fascinating half-hour interview which took 51 minutes. And it is difficult to know who is interviewing whom, but it's really, really powerful. I commend it to everyone who's on this call. And it's part of what's convinced me to change my stance in relation to protest. I'm going to be part of the big effort to get a large number of arrests in protests in London at the end of this month and the beginning of next. And as I think Val said earlier, it's really important, if you want to get involved, that you get involved with a non-violent direct action training before you join a protest. The training is really, really good. I can thoroughly recommend it. And I'm going to shut up now.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you for sharing that. That's great. And Tim, you started to talk earlier a little bit about the international context of protests and the legal response elsewhere. I don't know whether Andy or John or Val, any of you would like to comment on the sort of international perspective and what you're seeing happen in equivalent situations in other countries. Do any of you have any thoughts on that aspect?
I'm afraid in this country, the government will do what they think the people want them to do, regardless. They're just driven by getting elected next time, basically. And so until we get a big outcry to actually do something about climate in this country, until the public wants that, then nothing's going to happen. But how we change people's minds and actually get them to demand action, I just don't know.
Can I just challenge that framework? Because I think they're quite aware that most people want climate action. Most people want all sorts of policies that they are opposed to. They're not responsive to what we want. They're responsive to the voices of the powerful whispering in their ears, of their donors, of the owners of media companies, and so on. And those institutions are trying to convince the public that they should hate protesters. And that's to support the government as they repress us and demonize us. And that is all in service of this economic project, which leads only to one place. But to say just a little more in the international context is that's why you're seeing such a similar response everywhere. It's not just that you have one bad government here. Actually, right across Europe, I have quite a lot of friends now who are facing multi-year prison sentences for entirely peaceful action. Yeah, it's become terrifyingly more very quickly moving in that direction. And I think that's because people are more and more waking up to the reality of climate breakdown, that they are panicking and trying to exert control by any means possible.
And we've got 5 minutes to go. So I was just going to invite each of our, I can't see any more questions, so I was just going to invite each of our speakers to say a last few words if you'd like to. So let's go in the order we went through. So that was Andy. Anything you'd like to say to finish?
No, it's a really interesting evening. Thank you to everybody else. Learned quite a bit there. Yeah, I think it's difficult to know what I need to do. I think I need to just keep on what Alan said. We just need to really push this. There's nothing else I can do, really. Nothing else I can do apart from just keep on pushing, even though I don't know whether it's going to do any good, whether it's too late, but I just can't not do nothing about it.
Absolutely, and we've seen the incredible power of attrition in the Netherlands, so that's inspiring. But thank you for everything you're doing. Val, any thoughts from you?
Yeah, hi. Well, if you feel that you have to do it, you have to do it. And I'm always amazed, and I don't understand why some people care more enough to do something, and others, well, I understand people have different pressures. We've all got similar pressures, especially these days. But there's this thing when we put out our crowdfunder, and we were encouraged to send to family and friends, which is often a problem, those nearest and dearest who you hope would support you. And I just got back from my brother, I don't support anybody who breaks the law. I mean, it was that simple. And it's that simple for some people, for quite a lot of people. They see you only as a lawbreaker. They don't see the bigger picture. They don't want to see the bigger picture. So you just have to be philosophical about it and know that there's a lot of people out there that feel the same way as you do and want to do something about it, something positive. So that's what you have to go with.
Thank you very much. Inspiring, and keep making your brilliant signs. John, any thoughts from you before we finish?
Just a couple of points then from me. I noticed in the chat there's a request for the briefing paper that I referred to. I wonder whether you'd be willing to either give people my email address, or if you're happy to do that, then they can just contact me and I'll just send it to them. That's probably the quickest way to do it. People can also see that we put all our evidence up on a website, climatecriminals.uk. And then the final thing I perhaps mention is that I've been at this for 45 years, and obviously things have reached a particular peak now. Things are desperate. Mass loss of life is occurring. But over those 45 years, I will say that there are a huge number of people, a very large proportion of the population, who are worried about climate change. They're very worried for their children. They know that it's a big issue. But within a nanosecond, they believe that they're on the wrong side of a moral issue because they themselves are consuming fossil fuels, driving cars, and taking holidays on planes. And it's the reason why people are very reluctant to discuss this in family conversations or with friends or over a barbecue. It's not going to be discussed. So we have to break through that, and we keep on trying. We use a range of different techniques to break through that resistance. And we can help people to say, you know what, I'm going to find the courage to stand up for the vulnerable. I'm going to find the courage to protect the youngest members of my family. We can do it.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And finally, Tim, any final words from you?
I suppose I would just say that, you know, I think that the human threats, the response of human society to the crises that we face in many ways scares me more than the crises themselves. And that's saying something, because they scare me quite a bit. But there are lots of examples in history of societies kind of snapping into a radically different state, really quite suddenly, quite spontaneously. And they're very difficult to predict when they're going to happen. And it's very difficult to know what form is going to come after the transition. But it does feel as if there are lots of strands of change afoot right now. There is something seismic happening under the surface. And so I hope you can keep the hope, because no matter how bad things seem, luckily we're all idiots. We're all ignorant, and there might be something better coming.
Thank you, Tim, for finishing on a positive note for us. I really appreciate that. Well, thank you all. It's been a really interesting discussion, really grateful for your time, and thank you to our audience for your participation as well. If anyone feels moved to, these events are obviously free, but if you feel moved to donate, there is a contribution button on the Cloud Cafe website. And I hope the rest of your evening is great, and that you'll come and join us again for the next one. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chloe.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you, Chloe.
Thanks, Chloe.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.